Ready. So this is my presentation on Henry Ford, who started the Ford Motor Company and invented the assembly line. So he was born July 30th, 1863 in Michigan, 8 miles away from Detroit. He was born in the middle of the Civil War, so Abraham Lincoln was the president at the time, and Jefferson Davis was the president of the South. Okay, he moved to Detroit later on in his life, so like once he was able to live by himself. So when he was like 18, he moved to Detroit and found work in the machine shops. So he found he was actually really good at like building things and working on carriages and stuff like that. 3 years later, he moved back to the farm, which is where he was born with his family, 8 miles outside of Detroit. After 9 years, he moved back to Detroit, but in those 9 years, he had gotten married to a lady that lived in like the farm next to theirs. So, he moved back a married man, 9 years. So, at this point, he's like 30 years old or something. When he became, I think he was the chief electrician for the local electrical company, which meant he was on call to go answer anything that had to happen, but he never actually had to be at the office. So if anybody had a problem with electricity, he would go and fix it, but he never actually had to be at an office. So he had like a ton of time to himself. So he did a bunch of experiments. So,
kind of like a quarantine.
Yeah, he was essentially always on quarantine.
Let's start inventing things.
Yes.
Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, so during experiments, while on his self-quarantine, I guess we'll call it, during his experiments, he created a gas motor that could like spin a wheel and axles. So he had been experimenting with the idea of a horseless carriage. He wanted to know if that was possible, and he was able to do it. So his first car was the Ford quadricycle. It had 4 horsepower, so not very fast.
Wait, what is the Ford cars now? What horsepower do they have?
Probably -10.
-10?
No, they're actually really good. They probably have like 75 horsepower. I don't know how much a truck has, but it's much more than 4. It didn't go very fast. And I think it only went forward. I don't think it... Ford's not very good cars. Yep. Josh, be quiet. So the Ford quadricycle, I think it only went forward. It had 4 horsepower, but it was great because now people didn't have to carry horses around. They could drive the car themselves. So he continued experimenting with other kinds of motors, wanted to see if he could figure something that was a little bit more efficient. And so during that time, he invented the Ford Motor Company. So their entire purpose was to create cars. So at this point, he quit his job as the head electrician and started to work full-time on developing cars, trying to make them so that they were more efficient, cheaper, so that more people could buy them, meaning he would make more money. He created the Model T, which was probably the first car you will see. I'll talk about that in a minute. He created the Model T as he created the moving assembly line. So the moving assembly line. So this is in 1913. So I can't remember when I said he was born, but he's like, he's in his 50s or something when he did it. So moving assembly line, so everything gets much more efficient. And then people that worked against him also started to use his tactics with the assembly line. So the Model T is the first horseless carriage that you would see often on the streets because he used his assembly line to mass produce it, make it cheaper, easier to make. So, really, the assembly line was the key to getting everything mass produced, getting everything out there. So when he created the assembly line, it's when you put something on a moving conveyor belt and one person will do each thing. So I have an example. It's Josh puts brownie mix in a bowl, okay? Bennett takes the mixer and will mix it. Mom works the oven. She would put the brownie mix that had been mixed by Bennett into the oven and take it out. I would top it and then give it to Dad, who would eat it all.
You know who's grading this presentation. I like it.
So the assembly line, it just made everything so much more efficient rather than Josh trying to do everything by himself. Then I have something else going.
But it's
It's
Josh's brownie baking show.
You made an assembly.
It only works with
you
Josh.
you have employees now.
Yeah, you have
I'm
employees.
just that good.
So it just made everything more efficient. You could be doing multiple things at once. So everything was much easier. So that's my presentation on Henry Ford.
That was fantastic.
And then I have some Henry Ford jokes. So the first one is, did you know that 98% of Fords are still on the road today? The other 2% made it home. And then changing the logo doesn't change the problem.
Aw, why do you not like Fords?
New Fords will come stock with these. It has a cup, a beer holder, and a seat. So you can sit comfortably while waiting for the tow truck. Could have bought a Ford, but but I like trucks that run. I wish I had
Aw.
a Toyota on there. But that's my presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
Did you know about the assembly line prior to doing this project?
I did. Yes.
We
I knew that he
learned
was.
my history class.
Yeah, we learned that in history.
I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm.
Good job. No,
That's
great
excellent.
job.
Way to go.